Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Let's move to the other end where you have now a mature company. You have a sales force, you have sales leaders. What should be the role of senior leaders like the CEO when that's the case? You mentioned they should become the company's evangelists, right? To build the brand and position themselves with senior leaders into organizations their salespeople are selling into. What are the other roles that they should really occupy in this situation?
Yeah, that is really important. And I think that leadership doesn't sit around talking about this often enough, right? So you've got a mature company that's maybe 10 years in, maybe 20 years in. All the senior leaders in the company have a role in sales, especially the CEO. But what is that role, right? Well, a lot of companies do what they call sponsorships. So if you have a large prospect or a large customer, one of the senior executives becomes the sponsor for that account. And that means that they get to meet the senior leaders of that account. They come in when there are business reviews being done, when contracts are renewed, and things like that. So they're there to support and to match the higher level people. So it's, not just a salesperson out there on their own. And just a tip for everyone listening who may not know this yet, selling is a team sport. Yes, in the old days, but it was a long, long time ago, you could send one person out, kind of slay the dragon, right? One seller out to land some big Fortune 500 company for you. Well, that doesn't work anymore. These big companies, especially if you're a smaller company, in that maybe under 100, under 500 million, especially if you're under 100 million, these big companies take on a lot of risk when they buy from you as a small company. They want to have some confidence in many different things, in your financials, in your ability to deliver what you sold, in the fact that you're going to stay in business, these kinds of things. So you want these senior executives of your company involved. So that's really important. And I think that you need a process for that. So within the senior leadership team and the sales leaders, it should be talked about. How do we use our senior leaders of this company? If they are a sponsor for an account, what does that mean? When should salespeople bring them in? How should they bring them in? What preparation must be done? Right. So if I want a senior leader at my meeting as a seller, I have to do a certain amount of preparation, share that with the senior leaders or the subject matter experts or whoever else I'm bringing in, explain to them who we're talking to, why we're talking to them, what I believe the fit is, give them just the lowdown on what's happening with that, and then tell them what role I want them to play at the meeting so that they can do that. And too many times sellers ask for a senior leader or a CEO to come to a meeting with zero preparation. And I want to say to all the senior leaders out there, the answer is no. I cannot attend your meeting unless I am prepared in advance. We just don't fly in and wing it. That rarely works. And anybody who's in sales has probably been in a meeting with a CEO or a senior executive who has taken over the sales call and made it go a direction none of us wanted it to go. So that's a big no-no, right? So I think that the senior team plays an important role internally first to make sure there are no sales prevention departments in the company, to make sure they are making it easy for the customer to buy. So, for example, when legal holds up a contract for 3 weeks, that is not making it easy for anyone to buy from you. Okay. Or when there's some kind of regulatory, work that has to go on and it's taking weeks and months, that is not making it easy for anyone to buy from you. So, think about the things that your senior team does in purchasing, in accounting, in finance, in operations, anything that they may be doing as senior leaders that hold up a sale, that make it hard for a customer to buy. And then, secondly, they need to be supportive of the sellers. What does that mean? They can't say negative things about sales out loud where other people can hear them, because then it taints everybody. Those sellers are, yeah, they get to travel all the time. They're taking people out to expensive dinners. They play golf. They're doing that. Well, oh, okay, but they're also selling stuff which makes money for the company. So, yes, the way that they may do that may seem excessive or something to some people, but then they don't understand sales. In your business, if it requires you to take people to dinner in order to sell them something, then you have to do that. If it requires you to travel to them or go to a trade show, you have to do that. It's not glamorous for the salespeople. Trust me, they're away from their families a ton. They're traveling a lot. And, that's part of their job. But the amount of hours they work to do all of that is well more than anybody else in the company. So be supportive of that. Don't say negative things about sellers. If you don't understand what they're doing, then simply ask, right? And then the third is just to figure out how you can best help them help the customer. So in this orchestration, the salesperson needs to orchestrate the buyers, but they also need to orchestrate their own internal team to prepare them to work with the buyers, because we today, again, it's not just one salesperson. You're going to have a subject matter expert, senior leaders, maybe a technical team, somebody to do the demos. There's going to be lots of people from your company involved in getting this across the finish line. So they need to all be supportive, right? And the senior leaders need to help the salespeople get the resources they need to talk to the customers or prospects, and do all of the things that have to be done to guide the buying team to making a decision. So those are some of the ways that the senior people can be involved.
Well, and senior leaders are really critical in times of uncertainty or recessionary periods. And you mentioned two important things. One is that first is that teams need extraordinary leadership during these times. And second, your focus must be on sales. So perhaps you can give us some tips how to lead sales through a recession for mid-sized companies all the way up to large companies, because it's not intuitive for some.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always harder to lead in challenging times, right? Although some leaders really step up in challenging times. But I believe that this is all mostly mindset, right? So yes, there's a recession, but people still have to buy what you sell, you know, for most, right? So if there's a recession, times are tough, then you have to make it even easier for people to buy from you. Now, that does not mean lower your price. That is not what I'm talking about. You definitely should not do that. You should figure out the right price for your product and stick with that. But in these challenging times, whether it be a recession or something else like COVID, that was very challenging, especially for people in hospitality. And even though that was really rough, there were people still traveling. There were people still using hotels and planes and other things. So you just have to capture the audience that is buying, right? So I think that if you have the mindset that there is business there to get, and if you are flexible and adaptable to what is happening now, right? Then you can tailor to what's happening today and set up realistic goals for these challenging times versus sticking with a goal that's not going to work in these challenging times, which many people do. And then it's disappointing for everyone. It's very hard on morale. And, it's misleading for the investors, all of that. So I think you get your mindset right. You know that there are people who are still buying. You have to figure out how to get more of that market share. So it's a smaller amount of people buying. You got to get a larger chunk of that market share. And you've got to figure out how to do that. And again, it goes back to making it easy to buy from you, showing the people who need to buy from you that you're going to help them and guide them and add value, right? And be customer centric, not seller centric, right? You're going to have everything they need at their fingertips on your website versus making them fill out a form and wait for a date to get a demo, right? You're going to teach your sellers how to explore with them what their needs are versus doing a discovery call that only asks these very basic questions, right? So, in challenging times, you have to switch your mindset and know that there is business to get. It will be less because the total pie is less. So, adjust to that and then figure out the easiest way to do that. Now, that said, when you have a senior team that's willing to continue to build their network, nurture their network, and then make introductions into their network, it's going to be much easier for sellers. But here's the craziest thing. I've talked to senior leaders who are like, why would I do that? It's their job to go get those appointments and meet those people. I'm sorry. So, excuse me, you want it to be really hard for your salespeople, right? So they should do the hardest things possible. They should go cold call someone who doesn't know them, doesn't know your company, doesn't know your product, and see if they can get them on a call. Why? When you could make an introduction or somebody that you know could make an introduction. The senior team should work every single day to help sellers get into the accounts they want to get into. And people just aren't doing that. I just don't know why. But in challenging times, you certainly have to do that because it's going to be even harder to reach people. So you need introductions and you need to open your network. You need to, if you don't have a board of advisors who's willing to open their network, build a board of advisors to do that. And then teach everyone in your company to build and maintain and nurture a network of people that they can then leverage for introductions.
Great advice. I also wanted to give our listeners some of the other great pieces of advice that are somewhat common sense that you've given in the past, but during these times, evaluate your products to determine the most profitable ones. Examine the customer journey and find ways to make it easier for your customers to buy from you, like you mentioned. Focus on upselling and cross selling to increase customers' lifetime value, because likely you have that gold mine, right, in your existing customer base you don't even realize. This one I really love is prioritize your existing customers by doubling down on customer satisfaction to increase retention. Common sense, but common sense isn't always common practice and it's sometimes overlooked. And then finally, consider adding new products or services that round out your current offerings and solve additional customer pain points. Once again, nothing that's life changing that probably people haven't heard before, but it bears repeating because these are proven strategies that often go overlooked, right?
Absolutely. One of the best places to get new business, right, is your current customer base to sell them more or to sell them different products. But then the next best thing is to get them to introduce you to someone. So if they are successful using what you've sold them, of course they'll introduce you to someone else. But we don't ask often enough. And I was talking to a new client the other day, and I said, "Well, how often do you get a referral? Someone just says, 'Oh, somebody told us to call you. We know so and so, and they said you guys were great.'" And they go, "Oh, maybe 3 or 5 times a year." I go, 3 or 5 times a year? Wouldn't it be great if you got 3 or 5 a month? 3 or 5 referrals a month. So that means people are constantly talking about you and telling others, and they're calling you and saying, "Oh, I heard about you and I'd love to, explore your services." 5 a month. You guys, 5 a month is what you should be after, not 5 a year, right? But you have to be proactive if you want that to happen. You have successful customers. You need to ask them who they know that they can introduce you to, their vendors, their own customers, who their partners, who else needs what you provide, and get them to introduce you. Or use LinkedIn, my goodness, and see who they're connected to and ask them, would they mind introducing you? But it's so overlooked. It's just crazy.
Absolutely. One question that I get asked a lot, or the answer that I get when I pose this question, everyone wants more sales. We want more sales. So, what's the most common answer that I hear is we need to hire more salespeople. Why is that not maybe the correct answer in all situations?
Yeah, it's rarely the correct answer, but sometimes it is. The thinking and the math around that is, oh, if I have one salesperson who can do 1 million, then if I have two, they can do 2 million. And if I have three, they can do 3 million. So why not get 10 and we'll do 10 million? Well, I wish it was that easy. I wish that math worked, but that math does not work. So, what do? We have to think about lead generation. So, is the seller we currently have at capacity, right? Are they having so many conversations they don't have time to have another single conversation? If we are sending them so many leads that they are having so many conversations, it's overflowing. Yes, get another salesperson, please. That would be awesome. But typically, the sellers that we have are not hitting their quota. They're not having enough conversations. They don't have enough leads. They're left to their own devices to prospect, and most of them really don't know how to do that very well. And so they're not performing. So, again, another customer I had with, 4 sellers. Their quotas were each 4,000. Two of them were hitting 2,000. One of them was hitting 3,000. And one of them was hitting 5,000. Hmm. All right. First, let's look at the one who's hitting 5,000. He's exceeding quota. What is he doing? Okay. Then let's look at the ones that are not even close. They're half. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Now, figure out. So, is it the will to sell or the skill to sell that is needed? Now, if they have the will and the skill and they're still not doing it, then there aren't enough leads. So hiring another seller and you're thinking, well, we need 15,000 a month and we can't get there because, none of them hit their quota. Well, okay, how do we get them to hit our quota? Don't hire another seller who's also not going to hit their quota because you don't provide enough leads for them. And then I hear people say, well, they should get their own leads. I'm like, really? How do you think this works? So you're just going to put, high paid salespeople on the phone, just dialing for dollars or emailing thousands of emails out, hoping to get a conversation. It just doesn't work, right? You have to serve up those conversations either through introductions that your entire company, entire team, advisory board, everybody's helping to get those introductions. You've got marketing who's out there helping to pique the interest and get people who want to have a conversation. You've got certain activity that the sellers are doing as well. You've got trade shows, webinars, other kinds of events to gather people, pique their interest so you can have more, your sellers can have more conversations, right? So that has to happen before you hire more salespeople. All of your salespeople should be at quota before you hire more salespeople. If you've done everything you can to get them to quota and they're not, it's time for them to go off on a new adventure and find a place where they can be successful. Then you can replace them. But just adding more salespeople rarely works.
So, right now, since you mentioned it, let's talk about what kind of alignment there needs to be between the marketing and the sales departments within an organization.
Yeah. So marketing and sales alignment is different today than it has ever been, right? It needs to be different. Back in the day, marketing was a department, sales was a department, never the twain shall meet. What did marketing do? They built the brand. They made all the things look good and look and feel like the brand. They did advertising, perhaps. They maybe made some collateral that got sent out or handed out. And they really did very little to generate an actual lead. They did a lot to get the brand out there in front of people. And that was helpful, of course. And then when the internet came into play, right, then marketing really took over trying to get an internet presence, right, and get the website and all the social medias and all of that. Well, today that's just simply not enough because in the back in the day when people answered their phones, we could cold call them, have a conversation, and sell them something, right? Doesn't happen anymore. When email was new, we could email people, pique their interest, get a conversation with them, and sell them something. Email doesn't work anymore, right? Even social media is getting harder and harder. So we have to have other ways. And really, it is marketing's job in conjunction with sales to put out great content that piques the interest of people who can buy from us and gets them to want to have a conversation. So, in back in the day, people might have been writing articles or blogs, but they weren't really, the main thing that would get people drawn towards you. They would just help more with brand awareness. Today, we have to write short form and long form content that gets people interested and gets them to want to have a conversation. And so the marketing funnel, needs to deliver those people to sales. And it's just not happening enough because marketing's doing their own thing and not really paying attention to sales. So one, the targeting has to be right on and everybody has to agree on it. So the sellers and the marketers all have to agree. This is who we're going after. These are the things they care about. This is the messaging that will get their attention. And this is how we're going to approach it, right? That has to all be agreed on. Then marketing has to do their part and sales has to do their part. The thing is, we need marketing throughout the entire sales process and even after. So really we need marketing through the entire life cycle of the customer. So the marketing has to be very familiar with who the customer is and what they need and what they're interested in. So as a seller, I've got now people whose interest is piqued and they want to have a conversation with me. And after the first conversation, now I've got some more content and something interesting to send them to keep them interested between now and the next meeting. So I've got a meeting, I've got another meeting set up, but what do I do in between? That's marketing. I need that content. Could be video, it can be on social media, it can be short form, it can be long form. There's so much different types of content, but marketing has to produce that. Sellers do not produce that, right? And when sellers are left to their own devices to do that, not good. So marketers can also, they can be content creators, but they can also be content curators because there's so much great content out there. We don't always have to dish up something that we originated. It can be something really wonderful from a company that doesn't compete from us or from an organization or from the news, right? That we can share. So creating and curating both. And that has to be done in a way that sellers have something that's interesting to the customer throughout the entire life cycle. So I'm down to just before closing. I've scheduled the meeting with you where we're going to discuss the terms of the contract and agree. What do I send between now and then? I need some great content. Maybe it's a case study of someone else's success that was similar, right? And that kind of cinches it. It's like, oh yeah, wow, this other company was really successful with this. That makes me feel good. I really want to buy from them, you know? So whatever it is, right? And then once as a seller, I've got that contract signed, I'm going to hand it over to the team, account manager, customer success, whoever it is, that's going to now onboard them and continue helping them be successful with what we've sold them. We need content there as well to help drive all of that. So marketing and the whole go to market team, marketing, sales, customer success, has to work together all the time to make sure they have the right information to string throughout that entire buyer journey and really the whole life cycle of the customer.
That's a great explanation. And I just want to just emphasize one point where you said at the end, a lot of small companies can't create all the content themselves, but they can be curated. There's so much great content out there. Look for those resources out there because they're out there and you can use those as well. So don't feel compelled to create everything because that's a daunting task, especially for resource strapped smaller companies that just don't have the manpower or the marketing department to really do that. Before we end today, I always like to leave with a call to action. So, with the leaders listening, what would you recommend they do first in building a successful sales organization?
Well, I think the first thing that has to be done is for the CEO to really understand their customer. So it's different for every company, right? Who is your customer? Who is most likely to buy from you? What is a day in their life like? What kind of results are you going to bring to them? Really understand that and shift your mindset to how can I make it easy for them to buy? And maybe even go out and talk to some of your current customers and find out what's going on in the industry, but be aware. Now, I understand that, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company is not tasked with doing that kind of work, but for all of the rest of you, it's really important that you stay close to your customer and understand that. Also understand what's working today and what's not. So that when you go to the other leaders in your company and the sales leaders in your company, you're not stuck in the past trying to get them to do things that don't work anymore, using old methods and, you know, trying to follow a process that doesn't fit the buyer's journey. So make sure that you have a really good idea of what needs to happen. And you can do that together with your team. You don't have to go out and do that all on your own, but your senior team should help with this. What's happening today, right now, and what's going to happen tomorrow and in the future. Like, be ahead of it, right? And then that can trickle down to the sales leaders and the sales team so that they can adjust, right? They can adjust to the buyer journey. They can provide the training that's needed today that's much different than the training we needed to give salespeople years ago, right? And they can be very conscious of that whole buyer journey from hello to I'm your loyal customer.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Alice, remind our listeners how they can get a hold of you and learn more about your work.
Well, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And the only thing I ask is that you let me know you heard me here with Charles today so that I know how you found me. And of course, you can go to my website, which is aliceheiman.com. It's Heiman. And I have a podcast called Sales Talk for CEOs and all of those who support CEOs. And I would love for you to listen to my podcast. And you can find Sales Talk for CEOs on any podcast channel where you enjoy other podcasts.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.